In March 2025, Zenith Zone Zero dropped patch 1.6, pulling the trigger on a move that polarized the community. Buried in the notes, players found the corporate end state to a months-long standoff. The main English voice cast was being systematically replaced. To the union, actors like Nicholas Turkettle were drawing a principled line against future AI exploitation. But to a highly invested player base, they had become an operational risk. For months, players had to endure a broken immersion-killing muting spell, where voice characters converse with suddenly silent lines. On a non-union project with strict live service deadlines, the studio gave the cast an ultimatum: return to the booth or be treated as a liability. The studio didn't scramble overnight. In fact, compared to traditional Western developers, HoYoverse had been remarkably patient, swallowing the heat of unvoiced content across multiple major patches while maintaining union-level pay scales. But as Season 2 approached, the calculation shifted. In the relentless machinery of live service pipelines, an uncooperative worker becomes a bottleneck. And bottlenecks get optimized out of the equation. The ultimate failure here lies in the structure of Western labor frameworks. SAG-AFTRA weaponized a strike to secure AI protections, but in doing so, they overplayed their hand, demanding a strict labor monopoly that will force non-union or international actors to pay thousands in fees or face eventual blacklisting. For an international developer, this made US talent a liability nightmare. HoYoverse simply did what platform capitalism does best. They bypassed the localized union chokehold entirely, routed the recording pipelines through non-restrictive global jurisdictions, and built a massive unregulated data matrix to secure their competitive advantage. In my last Genshin video, I showed you how HoYoverse engineers parasocial bonds through micro-expressions and casino math. But what happens when the very human voices behind those bonds are quietly replaced by machines? Today, I'm going to show you the exact machine learning architecture converting your live service voice comms into automated data farms. By the end of this video, you will see why this billion-dollar character economy is about to collapse. Because here's the thing, you cannot automate a soul. And when the industry tries to do so, the economy breaks. To understand how we got here, we have to look at July 2024. The SAG-AFTRA union launched a massive strike against major game studios. The main issue was artificial intelligence. Actors demanded strict legal boundaries to stop companies from scanning their vocal biometrics and generating digital clones without paying them. But HoYoverse operates outside Western labor frameworks. The recording studio refused to sign the union's interim agreement. The contract contained an exclusivity clause that will force non-union actors to pay thousands in fees or lose their jobs. The union was pushing for a total labor monopoly. The voice cast was trapped. Strikers like Emery Chase drew a hard line, withholding their labor over AI protections. But non-union actors were striking in solidarity with a contract that will price them out of the industry entirely. Their leverage completely collapsed, but HoYoverse did not negotiate. In patch 1.6, the community noticed the missing audio. Actors like Nicholas Turkettle and Emery Chase were entirely scrubbed from the game. They actually found out that they were fired by reading the public patch notes. Then patch 1.7 hit a month later. Coleda, Grace, and Rina were all recast in a second wave. HoYoverse was systematically replacing every actor who refused to return to the booth. But the labor dispute was only half the story. While the actors were fighting for their livelihoods in the public eye, HoYoverse was quietly tearing up their privacy agreements in the shadows. Before this year, their policy explicitly stated that voice chat data was only processed for basic moderation and network stability. Standard stuff. But on January 14th, they deleted that specific clause entirely. They replaced it with a massive blanket directive, allowing them to use your input to train their AI models. So I tried this opt-out button, right? It took me 10 minutes of digging through a maze of bird settings menu just to find the toggle. They configured this data harvest to be active by default. and they intentionally hid the off switch. Players immediately connected the dots. The actors were striking to stop their voices from being cloned. And at that exact moment, the studio updated their legal terms to siphon raw acoustic data straight from the consumer base. We need to talk about why they are so desperate for your raw audio. A few years ago, text-to-speech was just robotic garbage. You type words, and a machine spit out a flat, lifeless GPS voice. It was completely useless for a massive gacha game. Think of these new AI models like a master art forger. The forger studies the brushstrokes of human sadness and replicates the underlying math. Then the model predicts the exact microscopic sounds, which is what engineers call audio tokens, based entirely on the emotional markers. It generates the voice and the emotion at the exact same time. But to make this parallel pipeline actually sound human, the model needs to be fed an absolute mountain of reference data. Cozy Voice Tree scaled its training set to over 1 million hours of audio. Of course, they can't get a million hours of clean studio recordings ethically. That is exactly why your live service voice comms are being scraped. But cloning a vocal timbre is actually the easy part. The real frontier, the specific tech that threatens the entire voice acting profession, is how these models mathematically fake human emotion. To fake a human soul, engineers use a trick called disentanglement. Imagine taking a recording of an actor crying and using a digital filter to physically separate the sound of their vocal cords from the emotion of the tears. You're left with a blank, biological canvas. It strips away the context. The algorithm takes a stolen voice print and completely detaches it from the actor's original intent. What remains is a pure vocal fingerprint. The timbre preserved, but the human experience erased. This is where models like Alibaba's Marco Voice come in. They use rotational emotion embeddings. The system never experiences sadness. It runs a precise mathematical rotation away from a neutral baseline and pushes the vector into a predefined zone for grief or anger, whichever the script demands. Then a cross-attention mechanism forces that mathematical rotation back onto the linguistic content. The algorithm slaps a synthetic sadness onto a stolen voice print. It is a highly sophisticated forgery of human intent, generated entirely from cold hard statistics. But where exactly do they get the millions of hours of high-quality conversational data to make this work? They start by strip mining their own game files. Look at the OmniCharacter 10K dataset. Academic researchers built an automated batch pipelines to rip raw character dialogue directly from the Genshin Impact client. They executed this extraction with explicit permission from the studio itself. They ran the files through FFmpeg to chop the audio into fine-grained segments. Then, they used the source separation algorithms to strip out the background music entirely. They are systematically stripping away the narrative context to mitigate copyright strikes. This leaves nothing behind but pure, unadulterated vocal biometrics. If your eyes are glazing over, here's the simple version. They take the actor's voice, throw away the performance, and keep the biological fingerprint. Everything else is just pipeline engineering. When a live service game hosts of millions of concurrent users talking in voice chat, and the privacy policy quietly flips to an opt-out model, the developer instantly acquires an inexhaustible acoustic dataset. That creates a new category of cybersecurity vulnerability known as the voice risk taxonomy. Voice, which stands for Voice Ownership Identity Control Expression Taxonomy, models how synthetic voice technology circumvents traditional cybersecurity threat models. Let's break down model inversion. Imagine an adversary repeatedly querying the game's new AI voice model with specific randomized prompts. Eventually, the mathematical weights inside the neural network get confused and start regurgitating its exact training data. They can literally reconstruct the raw, identifiable voice prints of the players who were unknowingly scraped. Then you have membership inference attacks. A bad actor doesn't even need to steal the whole dataset. They just feed a random audio clip of you talking into the public model. The AI analyzes the acoustic fingerprints and confirms whether your specific voice chat was used to train it. Your biometric anonymity is instantly gone. This was a calculated corporate strategy. By forcing an opt-out privacy policy, the studio turns millions of hours of your casual gameplay chatter into a free research pipeline. They are strip mining biometrics to build their competitive advantage. HoYoverse is building a moat and a system to generate infinite synthetic companions, completely divorced from human intent, threatening to collapse the game's economy. But why will the billion-dollar studio risk all of this? The math behind the collapse answers that question. Right now, voice actors command a premium because human empathy is scarce. But generative AI operates on a fundamentally different economic curve. Apply Richard Susskind's economic model to this. As basic capabilities of open-source text-to-speech frameworks converge, the tech becomes dirt cheap. The corporate moat is no longer the software. When the underlying tech is practically free, specialized human talent gets priced out of the room entirely. But let us pull this back to the player. Why does a studio this profitable care about saving a few bucks on voice actors? Because of gacha psychology. These games run entirely on parasocial relationships. Forget the combat stats. You're swiping your card for a companion. Researchers studying gacha economies call this overpossession. The human voice actor is the only thing bridging the gap between digital code and human empathy. When you replace that authentic emotion with a math equation, predicting a statistical token, you sever the parasocial tether. A zero-shot codec transformer processes the script without grasping its emotional weight. It merely predicts the statistically probable acoustic token required to satisfy a mathematical loss function. There is a concept in philosophy of art called the meaningful work framework. It says art carries intrinsic value specifically because of the human agency behind it. When you replace the actor with an algorithm, you strip away that agency. What we're looking at here is a systemic risk. If the consumer base collectively realizes their emotional investment is tied to a generative output trained on stolen voices, the immersive illusion shatters. Shifting to an AI-wash pipeline threatens to collapse the revenue loops sustaining these gaming ecosystems. And this exposes the fatal weakness of traditional labor frameworks. Unions need a monopoly on labor to have leverage. But we don't live in that world anymore. We live in a globalized, platform capitalist economy. HoYoverse just routes their pipelines through non-union jurisdictions and bypasses the guardrails entirely. When a corporation can instantly generate a synthetic voice or hire workers from jurisdictions completely lacking AI labor protections, the strike loses all material leverage. The collective work refusal becomes a mathematical rounding error on a corporate balance sheet. This leaves the voice actors in a corner of their own making. They bet that withholding their labor will force the studio's hand. But instead, they now face a brutal choice. Permanently lose career-defining roles or return to the booth under conditions that could require surrendering their vocal biometrics for future algorithmic training. Creative labor has been reduced to raw data waiting to be scraped and trashed. Corporations know exactly what they're selling, and it has nothing to do with code. They intentionally blur the line between the voice actor and the digital avatar. They organize global fan events and character cafes to fuse the human performer's real personality with the 3D model. Executives use this parasocial bond to print money. Then they turn around and use generative AI to execute mass layoffs. They overstate the capabilities of these models strictly to bypass human bottlenecks and force algorithmic management over the remaining workforce. The industry operates on what researchers call the replacing task model. They assume you will not care if a human is swapped for a machine, as long as the audio sounds close enough. But they completely misunderstand the character economy. Audio fidelity is the wrapper. What you are actually paying for is the perception of a soul. Studies using the relationship with fictional characters scale track the exact depth of the romantic and emotional attachments players form with digital characters. Developers literally hire behavioral psychologists to map out your loneliness. They use research frameworks to figure out exactly how much companionship you're craving. Then, they build a slot machine wrapper around it. Remember the art forger we talked about? The algorithm scans a spreadsheet of human grief and selects the exact audio frequency that mathematically fits the scene. And a highly invested segment of the player base is already catching on. Deep in the forums, players are actively ripping apart these audio files, calling out the hollow synthetic nature of modern performances. The immersive illusion of the virtual world is starting to crack under the sheer weight of corporate automation. Call it the parasocial paradox. By systematically eliminating the human actors to save on pipeline efficiency, developers are actively severing the emotional tether that justifies the exorbitant costs of the gacha system. We are watching an entire industry attempt to build a permanent monopoly on human connection using stolen materials. They strip mine the voice actors and siphon the player base. They feed all of it into a statistical blender. But a financialized commodity has never been able to replicate the shared human experience that drives these attachments. The meaningful work framework we covered earlier applies here. When a studio replaces a grieving actor with a rotational emotion embedding, they are destroying the very product that they are trying to sell under the banner of pipeline optimization. Here is the flaw in their algorithmic logic. The entire system depends on your ignorance of its mechanics to trigger your empathy. Once you know the voice crying in your ear is just a vector rotating into a sadness zone, the synthetic voice collapses into what it is actually. Probability math wearing a human face. And that awareness is your defense. When you understand the machinery, you stop being a passive consumer of synthetic emotion. You'll become a participant who can demand better. The soul is the one thing you cannot automate. And when the industry finally falls, the studios will realize that the one thing they forgot to scrape was the very human intent that made the machine worth building in the first place. We mapped the timeline of the silent recast. We reverse engineered the zero-shot codec transformers faking human grief. We exposed the opt-out data farms, siphoning your voice chats. And we watch the parasocial tether snap in real time. Corporate studios are quietly replacing human souls with algorithms to optimize their pipelines. And that algorithmic greed destroys the art and your hardware alongside it. You think your high-end PC is just failing? Think again. The game engines themselves are structurally broken by design, trapped in a bottleneck that melts your CPU just to meet live service revenue quotas. Click this video right here, and I will show you the exact software architecture trap causing gacha games to break your PC, and why the developers structurally cannot fix it.